I did not come to sell my country. I did not come to sell my continent. Africa is not a marketplace. Africa is our mother, and a mother can never be priced. Throughout history, temptation has often arrived with glitter. For nations, it usually comes in the form of money, big money. And for Africa, a continent told for centuries that it is poor, that temptation is even more dangerous. One day, in the heart of Burkina Faso, that temptation came knocking. Walmart, the world's largest retail giant, stepped forward with an offer unlike any other. Not millions, not even hundreds of millions, but $1 billion. A direct check. No loans, no aid, no charity. Just one condition. Open Africa's doors, surrender the markets, and the billion would belong to Burkina Faso overnight. For most leaders, this would have been a dream. The headlines would praise them. Western banks would smile. The IMF and World Bank would cheer. But one man saw through the illusion. Captain Ibrahim, a soldier who rose from Burkina Faso's soil, understood that the billion-dollar check carried chains. Walmart was not giving money out of kindness. They wanted control. Control over what Africans ate, wore, and consumed. If Walmart entered, shelves would be filled with foreign products. African farmers would collapse under unfair competition. African workers would remain cheap labor. Profits would flow straight to New York and London, while Africa was left dependent once again. And so Ibrahim refused. He did not tremble. He did not bend. He stood tall and declared, "Africa is not for sale. Burkina Faso is not for auction." The refusal was like thunder. Washington analysts mocked it. Paris laughed. London sneered. How can a small, landlocked nation refuse $1 billion? How can they survive without foreign investment? They asked. But while the West mocked, Africa listened. In Lagos, in Nairobi, in Bamako, in Dakar, ordinary Africans celebrated. For the first time in decades, they saw dignity. A leader who wasn't kneeling, begging, or compromising. A leader who stood. It was no longer just Burkina Faso's story. It became Africa's story. And soon, Africa's story became a global story. To understand why this refusal mattered, we must remember Africa's past. For centuries, colonizers treated Africa as a marketplace for themselves. They took gold, oil, diamonds, and cocoa, leaving behind poverty. Even after independence, foreign corporations filled African markets with imported goods, while African farmers struggled to sell their own produce. Imported rice, imported wheat, imported sugar. All while African crops rotted in the fields because no one paid fair prices. Generations of young Africans dreamed, not of building at home, but of escaping abroad. This was the painful history that made Ibrahim's no so powerful. He was not just rejecting Walmart. He was rejecting centuries of exploitation. He was declaring, never again. But refusal was only the first step. Step 2 was building something better. Ibrahim turned not to the West for loans or aid, but to Africa's real strength, its people. He asked a simple question. Do you want to remain slaves to imports, or do you want to build Africa's future? The answer came like thunder. Farmers, traders, artisans, and market women all said the same thing. We will build with you. And so the first African-owned retail store was born in Burkina Faso's capital. But this was not just a supermarket. It was a symbol. The shelves told African stories. Rice from Mali, coffee from Ethiopia, shea butter from Burkina Faso, fabrics from Niger, spices from Senegal. Every product carried not just a price, but dignity. When people entered, they didn't just shop. They felt pride. For the first time, they saw a store that said, "This is African, this is yours." Critics predicted failure. Instead, the first store thrived. Within a year, there were 10 stores. Within 2 years, 50. Within 5 years, branches opened in Mali, Nigeria, Ghana, and Senegal. Each store carried the same principle. Africa first. Local farmers before foreign corporations. Fair prices before exploitation. Dignity before profit. This was not just retail. This was a revolution. Western powers were furious. Newspapers mocked African goods as low quality. Banks blocked credit. Shipping companies delayed containers. Governments imposed new restrictions. They whispered in boardrooms, "Stop this man. He's dangerous." But the people had tasted freedom, and once people taste dignity, they never go back to chains. The retail empire grew stronger. Farmers formed cooperatives. Traders reinvested profits. Communities bought shares in their local stores. Wealth that once flowed overseas now stayed in African towns and villages. New cargo ships were built in Djibouti and Mombasa. Old colonial railways were revived to connect farms to markets. When Visa and MasterCard tried to dominate, Africa launched its own digital currency, backed by gold in African vaults. For the first time in centuries, Africa was playing by its own rules. Step into one of these malls in Accra, Lagos, or Ouagadougou, and you would feel it instantly. Shelves filled with African products. Children eating African-made snacks. Women buying fresh dairy from African farms. Young men and women wearing African-made clothes with pride. This was not just shopping. This was identity. This was sovereignty. Every store was co-owned by local communities. Profits were reinvested into schools, hospitals, and infrastructure. Unlike Walmart or Carrefour, whose profits flew to America and France, Africa's retail empire sent profits back to African soil. It wasn't built for foreign shareholders. It was built for farmers, tailors, traders, and families. This was not just a company. It was a movement. Within 10 years, the empire spread across 20 nations. Within 20 years, it expanded beyond Africa, opening in Havana, Caracas, Karachi, and Jakarta. The Global South watched and drew inspiration. They too were trapped in economic imperialism, and now they saw proof that resistance was possible. Historians no longer spoke of Walmart's billion-dollar offer. They spoke of the refusal, the moment when one leader looked at a billion-dollar check and saw chains instead of salvation. That single refusal became an empire employing millions, uplifting families, and inspiring billions. This story teaches us a timeless truth. True wealth is not measured in dollars. True wealth is dignity, sovereignty, and unity. $1 billion can vanish overnight, but dignity lasts forever. Captain Ibrahim's decision was not just about business, it was about destiny. It proved that Africa does not need to sell itself to be great. Africa only needs to believe in itself, invest in itself, and unite itself. And when it does, the world will tremble at its power. If this story inspired you, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories of resistance, unity, and hope. Together, let's remind the world, Africa is awake, Africa is aware, and Africa is advancing.